Y'all, Wizard101 is about to change every Shadow Enhanced spell and Scion for literally every school in the upcoming update. They've been sending out teasers to a bunch of people in the community, and today the community finally received the Myth spell teaser. As usual, I'll be linking the original source of the teaser video in the description, so check them out. But just like the depth and the life teasers that we've seen, these spell changes are deadass gonna change how Myth plays at max level. I think easily the Shadow Enhanced spell that is most used on Myth is Baba Yaga. This is what they're going to be doing to Baba Yaga in test run. What we see with these spellman paths is like the continuation of the pattern that they're doing. They're basically making it so that Shadow Enhanced spells in PvP no longer require 2 Shadow pips. So what you're looking at is actually what Baba Yaga requires you to have in order to use it in PvP right now. 6 pips and 2 shads. It's quite a lot, but it does hit super hard. Now what we're noticing in the teaser is the top hat, really solid 6 pip hit that you could use in PvE. The minion could interfere with stuff like traps and other buffs. So it is a little bit of a risk, I guess, but I would definitely pack it, especially if I max tiered. But the bottom path is where things get really interesting, because this is only a 1 shadow pip requiring spell and high damage shads were already deemed broken. For 1 shad and 6 pips, Baba Yaga, even at max tier, is only doing 655 damage while summoning the same minion presumably that it used to. Now, why is this such a big deal, right? Let's look at the role of Baba Yaga in PvP. Right now as a Myth, you have 2 really major big hits, right? You have the 11 pip Myth Jin. This is just a really heavy hit because it's 11 pips and Myth DPP, right? 11 pips times Myth's damage per pip or whatever formula you use, you're going to be looking at a massive 1120 damage base hit. Also, it helps that if you shield a lot, you could literally increase the spell's damage. But outside of the very pip costly Jin, you're looking at the only other really good finisher, which is Yaga. That is the role that Yaga serves right now. It is a base Jin, but if the game goes long enough where you actually get the 2 shads, this is a way to close out the fight and potentially do even more than a base Jin. Fun fact, back when they were reevaluating shads to begin with, they actually said that the minion on Baba Yaga was priced in for free, meaning Yaga doesn't actually take a damage drop off for the summoning a minion, you know, utility whatsoever in its current form. However, in this test ROM change, it does look like the minion seems to be counting into the pip cost, because Yaga is actually doing pretty little. For, let's say this was just a pure damage spell, you would expect for a shad and 6 pips it would do a little bit more actually. When I was sent the death teasers, they said that they're going to be pricing in more of the value of the new Shadow Enhanced spells into the utility. But right now, if y'all didn't know, the Baba Yaga minion is extremely low utility. All it can ever do is Guiding Light itself and maybe shield you once in a blue moon. I have a feeling that Yaga is going to fall out of the Myth toolkit, especially in PvP, because the bottom path is so bad when it comes to damage, and that's what it's used for. And it's probably going to stay that way until we get a proper minion on it, unless we're wrong and this minion is a new minion and not the egg one that's useless that we've gotten used to. So considering what Yaga is used for right now, yes, it's more accessible to use it for 1 shad, but you're literally better off using Ninja Pigs with the Myth pick. Hopefully they update at least this minion while test ROM is out. Maybe that'll actually save the spell. But yes, that is a big change that's upcoming. The next change is also gigantic. What you see on your screen is what they're going to be doing to Barbarian Saga. Now the top hat, as I feel like we've become used to at this point, it's a monumental hit because it's an 8 pip shad. This is yet another example of, in PvE anyways, if you want to use a bunch of spellmans, you can actually change the pip cost of Shadow Enhanced spells. And a higher pip Shadow Enhanced spell is just going to do a lot more damage. An 8 pip shad, the top hat with an enchant, this does like 2000 as damage. It's ridiculous. What you might find weird, while the top hat is a bomb damage overtime, meaning that overtime damage, you get it all at once 4 rounds later, the bottom path is notably not like this, which means while Yaga is a huge nerf from what we're used to in a shad, Barbarian Saga is introducing a completely new mechanic for Myth altogether. So this bottom path Saga, what it's saying in max tier is that for 6 pips in a shad, it'll do 560 damage, and then it'll place not 1 but 2 damage overtimes on your opponent that add up to 490 damage total, and they will both hit every round. Now that is a gigantic deal, because hitting every round means, let's say that someone has a damage overtime counter, even if they do it immediately, at least you're getting some value. But way more importantly than all of that, let's say someone doesn't have the pips or doesn't just pull the counter to your overtime immediately. Right, how it is in live realm right now, it spells like Hero of Chrysalis, which takes 5 rounds just to get any damage done, or or even let's look at the Barbarian Saga, right? The situation with these is, let's say you don't pull the counter first round, you still have the full 5 turns to counter that monumental 650 damage. You simply don't get any additional utility for these bomb overtimes as a myth unless you literally go against someone that's just never going to remove a dot at all, right? For such an offensive school like Myth, not having an overtime that actually hit every round, kind of like old school Basilisk, if y'all remember that, not having that is kind of weird for a school that should be good against shields and overtime based. This is all a very fancy way of saying, yes, Yaga got super nerfed, but Barbarian Saga got one of the biggest buffs we've ever seen for Myth. This is a very solid hit. And we're also looking at an overtime that will break shields every round for 4 rounds. I am a little iffied out by the fact that the initial hit is such a big part of the spell, because I feel like as a Myth, you know, you're looking at spells like, you know, the new Taunt or Improbable Gaze. I feel like the vibe is that the initial hit is normally low, so you get that initial extra shield break. I kind of wish they had a way for the Spellman path to either increase the initial hit and decrease the value of the dots, or the other way around. I feel like that would be really cool to see instead of just a damage increase. But who knows, maybe that'll happen in the future, because I would love to see like a double hit version of one of these overtimes with Shads. I think it would be really cool. Keep in mind, you do have spells on a Myth that literally give you extra damage when you have more than 2 overtimes on your opponent, 3 and above. The Barbarian Saga can be used with other overtimes to actually break shields every round and also set up gambits. Very powerful compared to what we're used to as a Myth. As if all of this wasn't crazy, y'all, what you see on your screen is what they're going to be doing to Myth Colossus, and it is a very meaningful change. So this is a Darkmoor Spellman. It looks like the Darkmoor Spellments are really only getting an update to the bottom path, or I guess the one that's allowed in PvP. We'll have a little bit more to wait until they add Spellman so that you could actually add damage for the top path if you want to use it in PvE. But the bottom path is a completely new utility for Myth. This is extremely exciting. For the simple price of 5 pips and a Shad, you're looking at a spell that does 375 damage after, not before, after stealing up to 4 shields. Now you might be wondering, this is basically like Steelboard with a Shad and some damage added onto it. Why is it a Myth spell? That's actually because based on the way they've been updating the game over the past few years, Steelboard is technically not an ice identity spell. While it is true that ice can use shields, which you see with spells like Lord of Wind, while that's true, they're not a school that can naturally counter shields like Myth. Myth can literally do both, which is why it actually makes a whole lot of sense why a Shadow Enhanced spell, which has a lot of utility because of that Shadow Pip, which is what they've said they're doing. It really makes sense why it's going to be stealing shields. I would have never expected a quadruple steal shield mechanic. Right now, people pack all kinds of shield counters. We're talking about Glimpse, we're talking about Fire Elf, we're talking about Minotaur sometimes. Drop Bear is a super popular one. This one teaser could replace all of that, because at max pips, not only could you steal 4 shields, but if you pip conserve, you'll actually have the 11 pips to use those 4 shields immediately to do the extra damage on a Jin. I frankly think if someone is just shielding, but not, you know, doing it too much, I feel like it's almost better to use this over anything else. I feel like this might be really good against Life, for example. Life does shield against Myth. They'll tend to legend shield, so they'll rack up those extra death shields even if you break the Myth shield. And right now, any normal response that a Myth has against shields, like Minotaur or Drop Bear, they're traps and OTs that can be countered by Life. This is a very punishing shield to shield counter, which is not something we've seen at this level. So it could make things that used to be literal counter matchups better. So this is a huge buff in my opinion for Myth. And I'll say up to this point, these are the 3 major Shadow Enhanced spell changes. But if you look at it at a net value, I'd say Myth is actually getting things added to them rather than losing things, even though the Yaga damage output is tragic. Now the next spell teaser is still very interesting, but almost concerning in a certain. What you see on your screen is Snake Charmer, and while the top path is once again like when we max tier these are going to be amazing in PvE. We're looking at literally the best 4-pip Shad for Myth in the game. Top path is really good. The bottom path is very weird. What they've done with the bottom path is they've kind of made it a double hit, just like Barbarian Saga, that also has an OT attached to it. But there's some notable differences. It does do some upfront damage and then does an overtime on the opponent. However, it's only 1 overtime, so it's maybe more easy to punish and, you know, less easy to set up a triple, you know, dot, you know, spell like Oni or something. Like, it's harder to set up something like this if you only have 1 dot. But beyond all that, instead of being a dot that hits every round, this one's a bomb dot like the other ones that Myth has gotten used to receiving. Now, this is weird because in yesterday's video, it looked like they were adding bomb dots to Life. And since Myth was always getting them, and now they even look like they're changing Saga to not be like that, I think a lot of people were assuming thinking that they would just do a full-ass switch and keep things consistent, make all bomb dots life, and make all dots that hit every round Myth. What this teaser suggests is that maybe there'll be a mix of these things for Myth, so you'll still have access to some hits that do overtime every round, but also bomb dots as well. While I don't personally mind that, I don't think they should use the same logic for life, because I think Hunting Worm and Burrowing Bane, breaking shields every round is crazy for a school that's not innately supposed to counter shields. I think that's just stupid. I'm a little concerned about what this means, actually not for Myth, but for life. I don't think a bomb dot for 1 dot is actually a huge difference. You could actually use this when you have 2 dots on your opponent, get the 3rd dot to do the own. So I do see some combo like ability with it, just like a little bit. But compared to Saga and Mystic Colossus, I don't see Snake Charmer getting used as much, which is why I'm not as, excited for this in PvP anyway. Now moving on to Tatzl. Now I think Tatzl is a shadow enhance spell that actually is very much more of a PvE spell, and that's fine. That's what they're going to be doing to Tatzl. It looks like we're going to be getting more spellments to upgrade the top hat, and they're keeping the confuse mechanic on it for the PvE version of it. But by upgrading the spell with spellments, you're getting an even better AoE for Myth than Orthrus, especially if it hits high end. And the confuse mechanic could also do all kinds of silly, goofy things that either speed up the game or at least add some, add some spice to the game. So I would argue that this is actually a staple spell any Myth should have for PvE, because it's just the best AoE, I would argue. And the bottom path, I would say it's not as good, in my opinion, for I would not really go out of my way to get spellments for the bottom path. I would do it for the PvE version of Tatzl. But it's a hit. It does 480 damage, and then it does a double universal trap. Now, the fact that it's a universal trap, in my opinion, actually makes it kind of worse. Because let's say that you trap and someone, shields, a logical answer might be to drop bear, and what they did to drop bear is that it clears up to 4 shields before hitting, and the actual hit is Myth. So let's say that one of those traps were used. For clearing those shields, the overtime that it puts on the opponent is fire. Now, that's because of the fire pip, I guess, on the spell. But because Tatzl is a universal trap, the fire OT is also going to activate a trap, right? If it was a double Myth trap, you could drop bear and have some trap pressure after. I could see some more comboing going on that way. I don't really get why this shad spell for Myth is a universal trap. At least make it chromatic, as in school specific, if other schools are going to be using this anyways, if that's on the table, right? Chromatic would make sense, or just make it Myth traps, because it's a Myth spell at the end of the day. I really would not use Tatzl as a universal trap. I just think it's way too easy to just have it interfere with other things. You could combo it with double hits a little bit better though, so I don't know, maybe a strategy with traps and double hits. I could totally see that happening, but I still don't see this being used as much as Saga. Definitely don't see it being used as much as Mystic. And finally, the last spell teaser is what they're going to be doing to Scion. This is what they're going to be doing. This is just something that we've probably come to expect for every school. The PvE version, which is a very, very huge hit. We're just going to have even more damage available, because spellments upgrade damage. If y'all don't know how the top path Myth Scion work, you either need 3 stun blocks on yourself, or your opponent needs to be stunned to unlock the double damage. I'm glad that the triple stun block thing exists, because otherwise, most things after a certain point just become stun immune. It would be nice to actually have that stunning that Myth gets. It would be nice to actually have that mean something after a certain point, or at least get a spell that rewards you for doing more than just stun blocking yourself, because stun blocking twice over buffing twice is kind of whack. This spell is really, really good in team settings where you have someone stun blocking for you and you're just literally having a lot of teamwork involved. So yes, it does have a purpose. I do recommend tiering it up if you get the chance. And the bottom path Scion, the one that's allowed in PvP, it's actually a little bit worse. I don't know why. For one, it takes all the way to max tier for the version of the spell that does extra damage when you have 4 traps on your opponent to do just a little bit more than the version we have in live realm right now. That was a lot of words, but let's say that you have 4 traps on your opponent. What this spell does, it just consumes them, and then it does 1395 damage. You have to max tier the bottom path version of Scion in test realm right now to make it do just a little bit more, 1415 damage. And let's say you don't have 4 traps, what the spell does in live realm right now is 900. No matter how much you max it out, the test realm version of Scion isn't even gonna break that 900. It does less. It's kind of a weird nerf, but I guess technically it's extra damage, so I guess, if you are running a trap strategy, maybe it's worth it. I think the top path version of Scion, similar to Tatzl, is better for Myth. That was my detailed breakdown of every upcoming Myth spell change. Y'all, I'm very excited. There's some major takeaways. One, Other than base Mythogen, we're actually losing out on a direct hit that can finish an opponent as easily as Yaga does now. However, in place of it, we're getting overtimes that hit every round, which I think is a gigantic deal. And they're increasing Myth's utility with Mystic by allowing it to steal not one, but literally 4 shields before even hitting. That's a huge new mechanic that I think will make shielding against a Myth even worse than it already is. The larger question of the role of bomb overtimes and where they belong, whether we're going to see them exclusively on life or maybe a mix of it on Myth, I think that's still up for debate. We're going to have to see more on test run. But I do think that does affect how schools play. So hopefully we get an answer that's both consistent and fun for people on both life and Myth. That's what I would want. As always, y'all, let me know y'all's thoughts on these. Drop a like if you enjoyed. Leave a sub if you're new. And if somebody hasn't told you you're awesome today, they doing something wrong. Stay awesome. See y'all soon. And yeah.